Turkish Airlines presents Business Africa.
Hello and welcome to Business Africa with me, Ronald Katop. This week, BRICS expands as it eyes a partnership with Africa. We assess the significance of adding Argentina, Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, Saudi Arabia and the UAE, and Africa's place in the deeply dynamic bloc. Also coming up, as the political crisis in Niger continues, businesses are counting their losses. We'll report on one drone maker who cannot procure components or receive payments due to sanctions. Also, India repeats a pledge to back the admission of the African Union as a member of the G20 in September. As holder of the G20 presidency, New Delhi is keen to position itself as champion of the Global South. Stay with us for the details. Thank you for joining us. Beginning January 2024, membership of the BRICS will grow from 5 to 11 countries. Collectively, the bloc will be responsible for nearly 30% of global GDP. And using the purchasing power parity or PPP metric, that translates to 37%. BRICS' share of the global population will jump to 46% thanks to the addition of Egypt and Ethiopia. And the addition of energy powerhouses, Saudi Arabia, Iran and the UAE means BRICS countries control 43% of global oil production. Here's our report on why African countries are eyeing a closer partnership with an expanded BRICS.
The admission of Ethiopia, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Iran, United Arab Emirates and Argentina elevates BRICS' reach and influence in global governance. When Ethiopia and Egypt's entry is formalized next January, the group will boast 3 African states with a combined GDP of nearly $1 trillion. BRICS leaders say the bloc is seeking to grow a stronger coalition of developing nations who can better put the interests of the Global South on the world's agenda. In Africa, countries hope that an expanded BRICS will serve as an avenue for greater trade, create synergies with the African Continental Free Trade Agreement and serve as a source of cheap development finance. With its own bank, the bloc can help fund infrastructure, innovation and manufacturing, all key constraints facing most sub-Saharan economies. More than 40 countries have expressed interest in joining BRICS, whose global appeal has grown fast since it was established 14 years ago.
Zemedene Negatu is the global chairman of the Fairfax Africa Fund. Thank you very much, sir, for your time. Let us begin with Ethiopia, surprise peak for many. What does the country bring to the bloc?
Ethiopia has been one of the fastest growing economies in the world. And then in Africa, certainly for about a period of about 10 years, it was the fastest growing economy, period. So now, granted, at the beginning, it started from a low base, but today is the 3rd largest economy in sub-Saharan Africa at $156 billion GDP. To give you a reference, about 20 years ago, a little over 25 years ago, it was only $8 billion. It's grown by about 15x over that period. So that the growth has been phenomenal. Secondly, Ethiopia is the 2nd most populous country in Africa. As you know, the BRICS are trying, so as a grouping of very large economies, and one of the goals is to be a counter to what they think is the G7's, the West influence in the world. And to do that, or at least to create the right balance, is how I see it actually, you need sizable countries with big demographics, big GDP. So at 127 million people today, Ethiopia is the 2nd largest economy in sub-Saharan Africa after Nigeria.
Zem, how significant is it that there's now 3 African countries in the BRICS?
Today, Africa has very little voice, if anything, in the big global institutions. We look at the World Bank, the IMF, to a certain extent in the UN, but we don't have a permanent seat in the Security Council. So if you look at all these factors, and even in the G20, it's only South Africa that's represented there, right? So whereas now Africa has 3 voices in in a very formidable group called the BRICS. Not only today, by the way, I'm forward-looking. If you look at 10, 15, 20 years down the road, the BRICS are going to be extremely powerful. So for Africa to have a voice, to be at the table where decisions are made, And that's, I think, where the grievance are from what I hear by African leadership is decisions are made on their behalf and they're recipient. They're not decision makers. So whereas with the BRICS, they have 3 voices out of 11. And also they have very like-minded partners within the BRICS.
I'll take you back to Ethiopia now. When it formally enters the bloc in January, it will be the BRICS' smallest economy. How can Ethiopia be a resourceful member of the BRICS given the size of its economy?
Ethiopia intends to be and is planning to be the manufacturer. It's commonly referred to the China of Africa because it's an ambitious goal of becoming an industrial economy. It's a large population using labor-intensive industries moving here from China, from the West and all that. So that will also benefit the BRICS grouping, but also Ethiopia. The other element is, of course, Ethiopia is a member of the BRICS. The BRICS Bank has billions of dollars, and it's going to continue to grow at that rate. So wherever there's limitations of accessing finance from the West, in particular from the IMF and the World Bank, it can complement financing sources from the BRICS Bank, but also from China, also from India. But the BRICS also will be significantly benefiting from having a dynamic, growing country in the next 10, 20, 30 years.
Zem, BRICS is seen by many in the West as a rival. How can countries such as Ethiopia, Egypt, navigate relations with the West while at the same time being members of the BRICS?
I have a different view than a lot of analysts or commentators who said that it's an either-or proposition. Either you are with the West or you're with the BRICS. I don't see it at all. I'm on the record. I've said this many times. They're complementary. Look at who was admitted, okay? Ethiopia, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and UAE are very strong allies, long-term allies of the United States and the West. However, it's an additional forum for shaping global thinking. I'm talking about the BRICS that these countries are joining, but also if you are a member of a group, you'll be prioritized in receiving, allocating financing from China or India or Russia or from Brazil. So these are not mutually exclusive groupings.
So Medene Negatu, nice to have you. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Ronald, for having me.
Now, sanctions by ECOWAS to force Niger to revert to civilian rule are devastating businesses. One drone maker says customers can no longer remit payments to the country. He's also unable to import materials and components.
A civilian drone maker in Niger is concerned that the recent ousting of Niger President Mohamed Bazoum by mutinous soldiers in July could cause serious issues for his business. Aziz Gunche has been manufacturing micro-drones for aid organizations for 7 years, but since the coup, the situation for Gunche and his company is unclear as countries have halted money to Niger.
The benefit of drones is a perfect tool for aids and developments because it's a tool who lets you catch the data as fast as possible. So you can have a mapping job, agriculture, in disaster situation also.
His small four-man team builds drones that are used to help aid groups such as the World Bank and United Nations map out project locations, collect data, and reach out areas that are inaccessible due to the growing extremist violence linked to Al-Qaeda and Islamic State groups. The company produces less than 10 drones a year, which can take 2 months to make and range in prices from $20,000 to $150,000.
Now, India says the African Union can become the newest member of the G20 this September. Prime Minister Narendra Modi has said this year's G20 summit, which will convene in New Delhi, will put concerns of developing countries first.
India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi says his country's role as the G20 host this year would focus on highlighting the concerns of the developing world and has proposed the African Union to become permanent members of the forum. Modi was speaking at the Business 20 Summit, an industry event which comes before the summit of the 20 leading rich and developing nations, which will be hosted in the Indian capital next month.
B20 में भी
Africa's economic development is an area of focus in B20. Also, India believes that the more inclusive this forum is in its approach, the bigger impact it will have. This will help in handling the global economic challenges, sustain growth, and thus help in implementation of the decisions here in the B20 summit, and this will bring about success. As host of this year's summit, India has consistently appealed for the fractured grouping to reach consensus on issues that disproportionately affect developing countries, such as debt, inflation, and climate change. A key part of that strategy, analysts say, is bringing the African Union into the G20 fold. Admitting the 54-nation bloc has already won support from China, the United States, and France. At present, South Africa is the only African member of the G20.
And that wraps up this episode of Business Africa. I am Ronald Kato. The news continues on air and online. Bye for now, and I'll see you on the next episode of Business Africa.
Business Africa was presented by Turkish Airlines.